Thank you for joining me, everyone. My name is Ron Levine from Mindfulness and Blue Jeans. I've been practicing mindfulness and insight meditation for almost 25 years. And I started myself during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression and a panic disorder that had blown up into agoraphobia. I was on short-term disability, so I was unable to work. I was trapped at home. I was unable to go past my front door because of panic disorder. And happened to be paired up with a psychologist who, even back in 1998, was several decades deep into practicing and teaching mindfulness and insight meditation. And he offered me these tools and techniques as a way of working with what I was going through. I was not thrilled with his suggestion. My feeling was, hey, I can't work, I can't go out, my life has stopped. And here's this guy talking about watching the breathing and stuff. It's like, huh? He didn't give me anything else at first, and I figured, all right, I'm going to try this just long enough. I can go back to him and say, look, dude, this didn't work. Can I have the real treatment now? And as I say, this was almost 25 years ago, and I've never had that conversation with him. I'm still practicing daily, teaching. My whole life has changed. So here I am. And thank you for being with me. Today is the next in our ongoing series of calming anxiety by living mindfully. I remember the difficulty of mornings, so I do this first thing in the morning, and I hope that some of what we go through today may resonate for you, regardless of what time it happens to be for you right now. Let's go ahead and get started, okay? I always like to begin my sitting by imagining I am suspended from the ceiling by a piece of string attached to the top of my head as a nice cue to sit up straight without adding any extra tension to do so. If we're experiencing some tension right now, that is completely fine. Completely fine. Very often we try to get rid of tension that we are feeling by trying to force it away, which is just bringing more tension to the tension that's already here. And that's not really a good way to get rid of tension. It's by bringing more tension to it. I found it can be enough to simply notice whatever tension might be here, if it's here, and allow it to be the tension that it is. And allow it to leave in its own time, which may or may not be today. I also like to notice what is beneath me. A chair, cushion, floor. Something is holding me up. And I can allow it to do so. There's a sense of grounding, of support. Let's take a moment to notice the support beneath us and this suspension from the ceiling above us. And whatever else happens to be in between the two for us right now, however it is. And if you haven't already, you may begin to bring your attention to your breathing. And similarly to noticing any tension that might be here, and not trying to change it in any way, we can notice the breathing that is here, without trying to change it in any way. Our bodies know how to process tension. Our bodies know how to breathe. Often when we get into trouble, it's because we're trying to interfere with these processes in some way. Like the mind knows how to work with these processes better than the body does. But does it? In my experience, not often. Not often. So we can interfere with our tension. We can interfere with our breathing. But we do not have to. And I find I learn a lot more about them when I don't. In fact, one of the things that I learn is how much I do try to interfere with them. And in fact, how difficult sometimes it is to not do so. And sometimes it can be enough simply to notice that. If I'm having a very hard time not interfering, I don't need to try to interfere with the interfering. I can simply notice, oh, I'm interfering. Perhaps out of force of habit. Perhaps out of a need for control. Perhaps out of some kind of fear. And it can be enough just to notice that. Now, the topic I'd like to cover today continues on this theme of non-interference. And again, I don't know that this will necessarily resonate for everyone. But it's something that I've noticed as part of my anxiety experience again and again over the years. One of the things that I find most challenging and anxiety-provoking, particularly in the mornings, is this mental fogginess. This feeling like things are not clear. And certainly even throughout the day, in times of depression or anxiety, especially panic, I find that things often can look distorted, if not necessarily to my eyes, then to my mind, the way I'm perceiving things. For example, sometimes if I'm remembering a previous time that I was experiencing anxiety or panic, and I'm picturing what things looked like, I'm looking through the eyes of the way I remember it looking at the time. Sometimes I feel like I'm actually seeing through tunnel vision, because I was so hyper-focused at the time. Or sometimes my vantage point will be such that it's like I was shorter than I am. Like I'm having to look up to people who I'm the same height as. There are these feelings of being small, vulnerable. Sometimes that underwater kind of feeling. Things will just seem distorted somehow. And I find I'm spending a lot of time struggling to try to undistort, trying to see through the fog. Kind of like if you're watching a movie and suddenly it deliberately goes out of focus. So the problem isn't with us perceiving the image. We're not seeing it with blurred vision. We're seeing a blurred image with clear vision. We're seeing blurriness with perfect clarity. But we're attempting to make the image resolve into something clear, which of course we can't do. So I find there's this struggle to try to force clarity upon these feelings of fogginess, these perceptions that feel distorted. And that's really draining. In my experience, not just draining, but kind of fruitless. If we're seeing something in a way that is foggy, blurry, distorted, we can simply see fogginess, blurriness. distortion. Like anything else, these aren't things, they're processes. In the same way, we don't need to interfere with our tension. We don't need to interfere with our breathing. We don't need to interfere with these either. These are observable. What is fogginess like when I'm not interfering? What is blurriness like when I'm not trying to force it to resolve into something that I perceive as clarity? Why can't I see blurriness with clarity? We tend to not like fogginess, blurriness, lack of clarity. Because there's uncertainty there. So there's this struggle to try to achieve certainty. And we engage in that struggle again and again and again. And despite years of going through this and never really achieving that total certainty we always want, we still keep doing it. We think, oh no, this time, it'll work, right? Imagine for a moment if we did not require more certainty. What if it's enough to simply have the certainty that there is some uncertainty? That in fact there will always be some uncertainty. What if that was okay? Or what if it's okay to not be okay with some uncertainty? Can we be okay with not being okay with that mental fog? That blurriness, that distortion. Even if we're having trouble making room for the experiences themselves, can we make room for our feelings about those experiences? Because that's really the ripple effect here, right? There's the experience, and then there's that feeling that we're not okay with it. And then there's the feeling that we're not okay with the feeling of not being okay with it, right? And you see how this goes. It feeds upon itself. And we try to break that cycle by forcing our experience to be a certain way. And again, we see repeatedly for years, decades, that doesn't really work. But this time, maybe it'll work, right? I find that if I simply anchor on the breathing, notice the experience for what it is, an experience of fogginess, experience of blurriness, experience of distortion. And these are just words I'm using from my experience. You may have other ones. If I notice the experience as it is, see what it does. See what it doesn't do. There's a lot of things I'm afraid it's going to do, right? This is why I'm fighting it. Well, does it actually do? No, all of those worst case scenarios I'm picturing tend to come up not from the experience when it's left alone. It comes from my fighting with it. So it's a real self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm creating the states that I don't want by fighting with the states that are here. Which is how I ended up with panic disorder for so many years. Entirely self-inflicted. Because each time I thought, well, this time, I can control it, make it the way I want it to be. By force. And like I say, this is a powerful practice, not a forceful practice. force is trying to bend things to our will. Power is the capacity to simply see how they are. When we see how they are, rather than how we're afraid they might be. Well, that's clear seeing. Even if what we're clearly seeing happens to be blurry. Happens to be foggy. Happens to be distorted. As you go through the rest of your day or evening. And things come up, internally, externally. If there's a feeling of fogginess, blurriness, distortion, uncertainty, that vague black cloud of doom or dread, right? Sometimes we feel like it's hanging over us. Something's just a little fuzzy, maybe a lot fuzzy, doesn't feel clear. Simply notice the lack of clarity. It's as impermanent as any other process. And when we stop trying to tell it where it must go, when we stop trying to tell it where it must go, we can see where it does go. And that just further adds to our clear seeing. And in the long run, that's how we build a path to clarity. Thank you, everyone. I'll be hanging on for a few minutes, and we'll grab a look through the chat. If anyone has anything they'd like to share, any questions, any observations. Ren, interesting experience. A full stomach brings panic. I've always been the opposite. Eating was a big issue for me back in the day, feeling like I didn't have enough food. Get light, feel lightheaded if I didn't eat enough and such. So that's definitely, that's an experience that is different than mine. That's interesting. Like anything else, it gives you an aspect that you can work with. Something that you can experiment with. That's the thing about working with this. We all have different experiences of it. I mean, lots of overlap, lots of similarities, of course, but not only are things like anxiety and panic, not only are they processes, but so are all of our reactions to them and the different characteristics of them that can trigger them. We all have different triggers for them, and those triggers in themselves are processes, which means they are workable. We can experiment with them. We can work on cause and effect with them. This is how we work on our karma. Karma is simply cause and effect, which is why this experimentation is so important. Ava, how do you cope with lack of attention? That's a big one in mindfulness and insight meditation. Speaking of karma, the 3 pillars of karma are intention, attention, and perception. Attention largely is a matter of cultivating our concentration, which is very challenging. There are a few ways that we can work with this, and I go over these in some of my other sessions, but particularly working with the breathing. One of the ways that I find it helpful to stick with the breathing is by focusing my eyes, even when they're closed. So I keep my eyes closed, so I'm not being distracted by visual stimuli. But even with my eyes closed, I can still focus my eyes just on the blackness in front of me, because I'm a very visual person, and I find that what pulls me away from the breathing the fastest and in the most sneaky manner are mental images, which of course I quickly latch on to and start running down rabbit holes of whatever they are, thinking about something in the past, something in the future, a daydream, what have you. If I focus my eyes, I find that I cannot look at the blackness in front of me and hold a mental image at the same time. Now, some people find this doesn't work for them, but I found it very effective for myself. Okay, if I focus my eyes as I'm concentrating on the breathing, and again, I do have my eyes closed, so there's just blackness in front of me, I can hold my concentration, my attention, longer. Another thing that I'll do sometimes is practice counting the breathing. So going from 1 to 10, counting, you could count just on the in-breath or just on the out-breath or in between. And what I found to be helpful is doing the one that's hardest. So I find it really, really easy to count on the in-breath to the point where I'll very quickly just start phoning it in. Don't even have to think about it. I find it much harder to maintain the count on the out-breath. So that's the one that I do, because I have to work at it. So it requires that concentration. It requires that attention. And there are a bunch of other things. If you listen to some of my other sessions, you'll hear some other things come up here and there. We can talk offline about this if you'd like some other. But for right now, since I need to move through some of these things, you can try working with those, certainly. Yeah, we can't control future events, stay mindful, and in the present reality of our lives. Yeah, in the present, and also remembering what has been skillful in the past as well. There's this misconception that mindfulness is awareness, and awareness is awareness. Mindfulness really refers to, in the Buddhist sense, the original sense of the word of mindfulness is a function of memory, remembering what we have done in the past that has been skillful. Skillful in this sense meaning not causing ourselves suffer. As an example, what I was just talking about, we may remember to focus our eyes as we're sitting, even if they're closed. We may remember to maintain some kind of a count on the breathing. So we are bringing awareness to that process, but we're also remembering, oh, this is something that has worked in the past. And we see how it's working out for us now. And then that's going to inform the future. So as you say, we can't control future events, but we can set skillful causes and conditions for future events to more likely be beneficial and in our favor. And again, this is karma. This is karma. Yeah, Farnaz feels so small, weak, my legs are jelly-like. Yep, it's amazing the effect that these feelings can have on our visual perception. I mean, any of our perceptions, but again, I'm very visually oriented, so this is the way it plays out for me, is this visual perception. Not even just at the time, but like I say, if I remember it later. When I think back to certain instances when I was initially housebound and having to interact with people, when I think back, like the mental image I get, I'm really small. Like I'm having to look up at everybody, even though, we were basically the same height, or, these people could have even been shorter than me, There's this visual distortion, even in the way I remember it, as well as the way I felt it, because I'm remembering the way I felt it. It's amazing how intense that can be. Eva, how do I see clarity without the blurriness? You might not. There's this great old parable about a student who goes to the teacher and says, "Master, I'm so confused." And the master immediately starts clapping and smiling and says, "Wonderful." And the student's like, "The hell?" He's like, "What? I just told you I'm confused. What are you so happy about?" And the master says, "What better place to gain clarity than from confusion?" But if we're going to thrash about within the confusion, we're just going to stir it up more, aren't we? What does the confusion do if we let it be confusion? Again, it's not a thing. It's a process. It's a process. A large part of where we get in the way, or what gets in our way, or how we get in our own way, is we decide that process is unacceptable. Confusion is unacceptable. Really? How the hell are you going to get through this life then? When we decide that certain processes, because they are unpleasant or uncomfortable, when we decide based upon that they are unacceptable, we get into lots of problems there. Again, that's my entire history of panic. And it was a huge breakthrough for me when I stopped saying that panic was unacceptable. It was very counterintuitive. It was the last thing I wanted to do. But when I got to that point and saw what the effect was, it was life-changing. I never went back. Never went back. Whole different ballgame. So, if there's blurriness, see the blurriness. There's not a right or wrong about it. It's just what's here. It's when we start putting right or wrong on it. I'm not saying there is no right or wrong things in life. There are things that are right, there are things that are wrong. But if there is blurriness here, that's not necessarily wrong. Again, take it back to what I was talking about. If you're watching a movie and the director deliberately makes the picture go out of focus. Well, if they're doing that on purpose, that's the way they want it to look at that moment. Which means if for some reason the picture did not go out of focus, That's wrong, right? That's considered a problem. We're still talking about a clear picture versus a blurry picture, but we have now flipped which one is okay. So is blurriness inherently wrong? No, we've just decided I don't want blurriness in this moment, but it's okay in that moment. What's changed? The blurriness? No. Us. Our perception, our decision, our desire. That's what's changed. Chris, I believe human perception is always to some extent blurred. That's the norm. Oh yeah, we don't have a choice. We don't have a choice. Our sense organs are fairly crude. If you think you see everything, look at something under a microscope. If you think you hear everything, blow a dog whistle. Our perceptions are not even a close approximation, are not giving us even a remotely clear view of reality. So even what we consider to be clarity is a very relative term. At our most clear, we're still not seeing reality as it actually is. Not even close. Not even close. All right? So again, we're deciding what is an acceptable level of clarity based on what we want out of it. Just like with that movie. If the director wants something blurry at a particular time, that's what's acceptable, is blurriness. Again, these inner conflicts are ongoing. My anxiety zaps my energy and focus. That's just it. That was the first insight I ever had in this practice, in my second sitting, when I saw all the civil war going on inside of myself and how my issue wasn't really anxiety, but the fighting I was engaging in with it. I had my first ever insight as I watched that happening, which is if you fight yourself, you've already lost. It's an unwinnable war, because who are we fighting? Ourselves. So I have this anxious energy, this panic energy, and then I have this other energy that I'm identifying with as being, the real me, the me that I think shouldn't have anxiety. And I'm using that energy to try to stamp out the anxiety energy. And I'm wondering why I'm exhausted doing this day in and day out for years. And one of my biggest triggers for anxiety and panic was feelings of low energy and exhaustion. And what was I doing but depleting my energy and causing my own exhaustion, which just perpetuated the cycle. Again, bringing tension to tension and expecting ease, relaxation, comfort. Well-intentioned, really dysfunctional. Farnaz, did family, friends help you on your journey not being nosy? No, Farnaz, you and anyone else here, you can always ask me anything. Yeah. My now wife, girlfriend at the time, who I was living with, was unbelievable. And she'd had some history with anxiety herself, so she understood, not to the extent that I was, but there were some people close to me who really didn't get it. But she was unbelievable. Really unbelievable. And there were a few others as well. So I did have some of that. And I did have some of the negative experiences that we sometimes envision that we could have. And I do feel like the atmosphere in general, at least around here, is a lot better than it was back then. We talked about this, not you and I, but in general, we talked about this a little bit last week, about how there are more things out here, like greater acceptance of things like medication, meditation, things like Insight Timer. In the late 90s, it was not as good, I feel like. And it's still not where it could be or should be, of course, but it seems like it's a much more open topic these days. and there are more support structures in place out there, in person and certainly online, things like this. It's extraordinarily difficult if we don't have some kind of support system in place, which is why I'm glad at least things like Insight Timer, Insight Timer Live, things like this exist. Again, this is my way of giving back to this practice that has given me so much, is to be able to reach other people around the world. This is the way I've always felt about this. If I can reach just one person and make their journey a little bit easier with my experience, then, I mean, that's all I can really ask for. And that's something that I know at this point I've done many times. So I've been very happy with my mindfulness and blue jeans practice for a very long time, because I could stop tomorrow. I don't plan to, but I could stop tomorrow and be happy because I know I have reached people and helped people based on what I have found for myself through tremendous difficulty. So I'm glad that at least that these platforms exist, and that I can be whatever level of help I can be for others who are going through the same sort of thing that I've gone through, or are going through something different than I went through. Because we all experience pain and we all experience suffering. It's universal. No one's immune. Sometimes we look at other people, think they're immune, especially in our darkest moments. Everyone else seems immune, right? Like I was saying a little bit during the sitting, we get that underwater feeling. Kind of feel like everyone else is looking at us from the outside and we're kind of in a fishbowl. And again, everything kind of looks and sounds and feels distorted. And we feel like the old Twilight Zone episodes, where it's like, you know, the classic thing of Twilight Zone episodes is the thing where it's like you feel like you're the only one, right? You're in some kind of weird situation, you feel disoriented, and you feel like you're the only one, and everyone else is normal and on the same page, and they're fine, right? They're just going about their lives being normal. And we're here, like, feeling completely disconnected. And if it helps at all, if there's one thing I have found over and over and over and over again, talking to people in groups, private clients, we all feel that way. Every one of us feels like everyone else has their shit together except us. Doesn't seem to matter who it is, how much success they seem to have. Everybody at some level, in my experience, has that same underlying nagging fear of, I'm the only one who doesn't know what the hell I'm doing. I do too, by the way. I'll come right out and say it. I do too. So I'm not going to hide it from you. Right? It's part of my practice. And it's okay. It's okay. It's not something that I have to kill. It's not something I feel like I have to hide. And I think part of the reason I feel that way is simply because I know everyone else. Because like I say, I've seen it over and over and over again. So if anybody out there is looking at me and saying, geez, I mean, this guy, he's got it all together. I don't feel that way. I don't feel that way. But I don't have to. It's not necessary for me to feel that way to be okay. That's the huge part of this practice. It's not that we're going to not experience blurriness anymore, that we're not going to experience fogginess anymore. It's that when they come up, they're okay. Because if they're okay, then who cares if they're here? We don't have to stamp them out. Same thing I went through with anxiety. Oh, some feelings of anxiety are coming up. Okay. not a crisis. Not necessarily comfortable, not necessarily what I would have ordered off the menu, but not necessarily a threat, not necessarily a crisis, which is, of course, the way I treated them for so long. And well, look how that worked out for me. Okay. So it's not that I never experience those things anymore. It's that it's okay if I do. Just like the blurriness, just like the fogginess, just like tension. They're allowed. They're allowed. And I think I'll wrap it up on that note. Thank you all so much, and I hope to see you all again real soon. Cheers, everybody. Take care.